to Publishing by the Numbers. This is episode number 18, and we are part of the way through February by the time that you guys are going to see this. Haha. Actually, to be honest, this is the day that CJ and I are on our way back from Superstars. So if we happen to see you at Superstars, hi! It's us again. And we will talk more about what Superstars is and everything that we did there and all of that kind of thing, probably in March. But that's where we're headed off. So anyway, today we are going to talk about romance structure and beats. And V bowed out for this one because she finds romance tremendously boring. And so she thought, if you're going to talk even more about what romance is, I'm going to go somewhere else and do something much more interesting. She will be back and we will miss her, but at the same time, that's okay. So instead, you get the two of us. I'm Jana S. Brown, and this is my amazing co-host, CJ and Aya.
Hey, guys.
We are both authors who have pen names in romance. CJ, what do you write?
I write young adult romantic fantasy under CJ and Aya. And then I've got sci-fi romance that I do under a completely different pen name because it is quite steamy. It is not for teenagers at all, I know. And then I do a clean romantic comedy series of books. So I try to cater to adults in the steamy and then the clean. And then, of course, I've got clean for teens. So I've got 3 different pen names in 3 different sub niches within romance, and it is a lot of fun. What about you, Jana?
I have one romance pen name at this point, and it is kind of an umbrella name where I have, it's Jadlyn Asher, and Jadlyn has contemporary romance. I have a series of contemporary romance, and then I have a science fiction romance, and I've got more science fiction romance coming. And pen names are an interesting thing, which we will tackle head on probably maybe next episode. So somewhere here in the next little bit, we'll tackle pen names and, you know, why we've decided what we've decided, because we both have multiple pen names and we both have reasons for it. My pen name is a little bit broader, but that's kind of a content choice, which is also something that we'll handle next episode, I think. But it means that we both write in romance. We're both really familiar with what romance is and, you know, some of the ins and outs of what's going on with it. But this brought us to the idea that we wanted to talk about the fact that romance really gets a bad rap for being formulaic, for being something where you can see the ending coming a million miles away. And I was going to ask CJ, is that a bad thing? Is the formulaic nature of romance its downfall?
No. And the reason why I say no to that is because so many readers love it. The readers who love romance, and when I say romance, I'm talking about a very specific type of book here, okay? The readers who love romance are those who enjoy that initial journey, that very formulaic journey of how the people meet and how they fall in love, and then always, you know, the happily ever after. That does not mean that everything has to be the same, and I think that's part of the problem. When people say, oh, it's just formulaic, it's predictable, everything is the same. Sometimes that can be. And I think that is a con to this formulaic structure, is that sometimes writers can get lazy. And instead of taking these very formulaic paths through that journey and giving us kind of a little twist or a little something different, and thinking outside the box, yet still doing that within the framework of what a romance should be, people tend to just regurgitate very cliched stuff. And so I think that's part of the reason why it's always just looked at as a bad thing. Now, at the same time, though, there are even little factions within romance where it's like, no, please regurgitate everything because that's what I like. So, and the best example of this is Hallmark. Hallmark does the same thing over and over and over in exactly the same way. There's very little variation, and Hallmark is loved and adored by so many readers, me especially, because there are certain points in my life or certain moments in the day or in the week where I don't want surprises of any kind, whether emotionally or you know, and so I need that comfort and that feeling of control to sit down and watch a Hallmark movie. and know exactly what is going to happen. And if for whatever reason that deviated in any way, if there was someone who passed away, if there's, any little change in that formulaic thing within Hallmark, I would be outraged because I want to feel exactly what I want to feel. And I want to see exactly what I want to see. And so we talk about market research and expectations. Understand the expectations of your reader audience and recognize that it's only bad if your readers don't like it. Honestly, it only doesn't work if that's not the expectation for that particular readership. So yes, it can be formulaic, but no, I do not believe it's a bad thing. What are your thoughts on that, Jenna?
I have to agree. So, when we talk about romance being big business, guys, you're talking just shy of $2 billion last year. It's really big business. When you talk about which categories sell the best on any given distributor, romance always leads the pack. Everything else, you kind of have generalities. Usually it's mystery and then science fiction and fantasy under that. But those can switch depending on who put out a bestseller this year. If Brandon Sanderson, hits all of the fantasy notes, then it's going to be number 2 this year. But romance is always on top. People spend a lot of money on romance, and we all want a piece of that pie. So, and that's a very business kind of thing to say, yes, I want to write romance because of that. I write romance for other reasons too, but I'm never unhappy to be in a genre where there are active readers and readers who read a lot. This is where we get the term whale reader, which is never meant as an insult, but it simply means readers that consume a lot of books. I mean, sometimes to the point of 2 or 3 books in a day. So if you create a series that they love, you're going to have rabid fans who continually come back to you. And that is satisfying on so many different levels. I mean, not only financial, but it's emotionally satisfying, and it's so enjoyable to have people love what you're writing. So that's kind of fun. But yes, I don't think the formula is a bad thing because that is what those readers want. It's all about an emotional journey. And they want to feel that emotional journey over and over again because it's a very, very warm and fuzzy kind of feel in most of the subgenres. Now, dark romance and mafia romances and that kind of thing in the last year or so have been really, really popular. And they have lots darker themes, darker content and things like that. But interesting enough, if you really look at it, they still hit a lot of these formulaic beats as far as by the end, even in a dark romance, a bad boy romance or whatever, they've come through stuff and they're together as a couple, either happily ever after or happily for now. So it's not only the light and fluffy we're talking about here, it's really everything that falls under that romance umbrella gives people this emotional journey. And it's that emotional journey of 2 people meeting, the challenges they go through, falling in love, more challenges, but eventually coming out, you and me against the world. So I think that works because, like you say, it's what the readers want. And as a romance reader, it is really satisfying. And often it's like Christmas. It's why Christmas sells all year round, because sometimes you just want to read something that makes you feel all of those squee happy things that are Christmas. And for romance readers, they want to feel all those squee happy things that is the process of falling in love. This is about an emotional journey, not about repetition. So yes, they're not all the same. There can be lots of different content, and no, the formula is not broken, nor does it make it repetitious and dumb, unless as writers, we get lazy.
Yeah.
And that can happen. So writers out there, we're telling you, don't get lazy. Make sure you're always doing something unique. You're always doing something fun with it. So what beats do you think are important to, we'll say, most romances? Well, and what is a beat? Beat is a word we use a lot. We should probably define that.
Let's define that. So a beat is a plot point or a very specific event at a very specific time within your story. So we call it a beat because you need to beat it or you need to hit it. You need to nail that in that moment. And it's like the percussion to a song, right? It lays down the track for that song and the steadiness of that and the pacing of it. So just like drum beats do that in a song, this is what you're looking at within the pacing and flow and organization of a story. The beats are there to keep time, keep that tempo going and move the story along in the way that it needs to be moved. And certain beats can be moved around just a tad as far as like, does it happen exactly here or not? But there are other beats that have to happen within a very specific time frame and that are incredibly important. And they're so well known within the romance community of writers that we often make little, jokes about them. And we've named those beats. So one beat is the meet cute. Which is where our love interests meet for the first time. Generally, well, depending on the sub niche, for example, a romantic comedy, that's going to be a little awkward, embarrassing, funny, possibly a little antagonistic because, it's kind of like they run into each other or it's a little clumsy. I mean, if you've ever watched Wedding Planner with Jennifer Lopez, that meet cute is hilarious when she's about to get hit by the dumpster and he runs and pulls her out of the way and she's trying to get her Gucci shoe out of there and she's like, no, my Gucci shoe, I need to get it. I would rather be hit by a dumpster coming down the road than lose my designer shoe. So it's just, funny things like that. You can really peg what kind of meet cute based on the sub niche you're in. So for a dark mafia romance or something else, those meet cutes, those beats need to hit the tone or really fit the style of the sub niche that you're in. So it would not be particularly hilarious, I would say, or lighthearted or funny. It would be a little bit more mysterious, dangerous. That meet cute might be a little bit darker. Whatever type of meet cute it is, it needs to happen at a specific time. And usually always within the first, I would say 10% of your romance book, 10 to 15%. And then you've got the inciting incident. And that is another absolute necessity, where sometimes you can actually see the meet cute very closely aligned with the inciting incident. Those happen together really fast sometimes, depending on the book that you're writing and the niche market that you're in or the sub niche you're in within romance. And then you've got other things like the grand gesture that comes towards the end. So we have names for all of these beats and they're important. And the way you know how they're important is because they keep cropping up in all of your writing conferences, and in all of these plot devices. And also if they weren't there, you don't have the story that you need. The pacing is off, it feels off. Even as a reader, most readers who read romance, they can instinctively tell when something is off, if that beat is not there, because they're so used to those beats being there. If it's not there, they can tell it's off. They can't pinpoint it. They don't know why or how. They don't have a name for it, but they can tell something's wrong and they will write a review that says, meh, I set it down. Or they got upset about something and they can't really nail it exactly and identify it most of the time, but you can. If you as an author read what they say, you can go back in and go, I missed that beat. I missed it, or it wasn't where it should have been. So yeah, that's how you know it's important. What are your thoughts on that, Jana?
Michael Brent Collin, he writes horror, actually, some really good horror and some really good fantasy. But he, at a conference I was at, said, bore me or confuse me and you lose me. and that's really, like you said, it's that thing about, can they put the book down? Yeah. I don't want them to be able to put the book down. And so hitting those beats, making those emotional highs and lows is part of that pacing that keeps them in the story. Because I want to be the person that I got one of these, and I do love these emails, but I got the email that said, damn it, you made me stay up until 3 o'clock in the morning. And it's like, yes, that's the thing you want, because that tells you that your pacing and the beats you're hitting are solid enough that it's one more page-ish. I'll just read one more chapter and then I'm going to put it down. But the one more chapter leads into this next great thing. And so I don't want to put it down. And we all know it's driving towards something. And stories do that. Stories drive. Almost every story has a point that you have to get to. And you'll find this if you ever have a conversation with a small child, because children are still learning the art of storytelling. And so you will get, I remember having conversations with my boys when they were very young, and they would be telling me about a video game, and I was waiting for the high point of the story. Where is the punchline of the joke? Where is the something that is, this is why you're telling me the story? And I came to realize that they just wanted to tell me about everything that happened all the time. There was no high point, there was no punchline, there was no anything else. They were just going to tell me everything that happened in agonizing detail. And I loved them, so I let them tell me everything that happened in agonizing detail. And as they grew up, they started to develop this idea of storytelling, that the kinds of things you want to tell somebody about in your life are usually the things that have emotional punch. And so instead of it being, here is every single detail of all of the coins that I gathered in the video game, it is, oh yeah, went through all those levels and the boss fight. We got to talk about the boss fight because it was awesome. And it's all the rad things we did about the boss fight, because all of those little other details were boring, that they were too minor to the story, and they didn't know that. And so we want that in our structure. And if you're not a plotter, we've talked about plotters and pantsers before, discovery writers still hit the beats. It's just you haven't written it out and said these are where the beats go. It's that, you know, from reading lots of romance books, from watching media and stuff, that this feels right, like what CJ was saying there. And so you're still hitting beats. You may just not know that that's what they are. Because you're looking at, okay, what emotional up do we have to have? Then what emotional down? Because a story that is flat is no fun.
Yeah.
So that was a long way to say to get to that point. And I do think it's interesting that really, really good writers can move the beats around a little bit. So like saying, you know, generally your meet cute happens within that first 15%. I've seen people who have been able to push it back further, but it means that what happens before that has to be utterly engaging on its own.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not, you need to trash that and you need to start somewhere else. You need to move that meet cute up. And a lot of that comes through practice. And for most of us, we don't get to break those rules because we can't do it well. We piddle around too much going, well, what are they doing until they meet? And our romance readers really want them to meet so that they can identify, these are the people that I should be rooting for. Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of those beats as well, is those beats help them to identify who are the love interests, who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, who's the best friend, who are all these people. And it also helps them to identify what subgenre they're in and what tropes are being used, which means now we're going to go to the question about tropes. You want to talk about tropes?
Yes, I love tropes. So tropes are fun. Tropes are what we would call a plot device, or a tool that you're going to use within your plotting framework that do speak to theme a little bit, but also speak to conflict. And so what I have found are, just an example of a trope is an enemies to lovers trope, or the amnesia trope, where they finally get to a point where they love each other, ta-da, and they work so hard to get there, and then there's a car accident and the female loses her memory, or the other guy, and then they've got to work from the beginning again. I have been nailed for the amnesia trope that I used in my Paranormal Misfits series in book 3, and I was like, oh, I don't care, I love this trope so much. You can hate it, but I know a lot of people who love it. So
50 First Dates,
yeah,
it did that really well with the recurring amnesia, the lack of her short-term memory, and him having to woo her all over again every single day. That was a cute way to do the amnesia trope, but put it on its head.
Exactly.
Because we often think the amnesia trope goes with soap operas, which are it's romance at its silliest, but yes.
I love the novellas. Oh man, don't even get me started on that. They're so much fun to analyze, and maybe that's because I'm a nerd. But you do have to sit there and go, this is why it's compelling to people, even though it is ridiculous and sometimes the scripts or the acting is over the top. It's still engaging and compelling and fun because of all of the plot devices and the tropes and the things that they use that people recognize and love. And that make the story a little bit interesting. And so, yeah, you do want to turn it on their heads. And so the way that I took that amnesia plot and turned it on its head was that she was actually with someone who wasn't the love interest. She'd been taken from her love interest. woke up, had that whole, because it was a magical system. So there was a magical in her brain. And now she's looking at someone who's saying, I'm the person you should be with. And it's a completely different, set of her trying to get used to this new person and yet feeling instinctively that there's something wrong, even though she can't remember. So there are little things that you can do to these tropes, to these plot devices, to make them unique all on their own. Okay. And so because of that, because of this opportunity to take a trope and turn it on its head, I don't think I've ever really looked at a trope and said, I'm not going to use you, because there's always some really fun, interesting ways in which to do that. Now, the tropes that I see used repeatedly are the marriage of convenience trope, enemies to lovers trope, fake boyfriend, fake girlfriend trope. And if I'm being honest, I never tire of those tropes. I will actually go seeking those. I will say enemies to lovers romance on the beach, or, do some kind of search term in there where I am specifically looking for those types of romance books. And I will read them because I want to see how the author did it. I want to see what cool little things they put in there. What kind of characters do they have? Because that inherent conflict that trope provides, where two people are forced to be together, you've created a specific type of adhesion, even though they don't want to be around each other. They don't love each other yet, but they have to be there. And then that's where that development comes, and that romance development comes into play. You can play that so many different ways within that parameter of the trope. And so I like these tropes because it offers so much ready conflict. It's just right there. And then it's up to you how you navigate that conflict and how you make it your own. So tropes are fun things. And you can go and look for resources online where you can get tons of, you could Google romance tropes and find a really helpful blogger who gave you a list of all of the romance tropes that you could possibly use within any sub-niche in romance. And then you've got a lot of material to play with, because one trope could spark an idea and then you're running with it, and the other reason why these are really important is because it's recognizable to readers. And it's all about those expectations. Certain expectations have been set. When someone finds an enemies to lovers romance, they can already taste the inherent conflict within that one little trope. And if you love a sassy heroine and you love a kind of an alpha male and they're kind of at odds with each other, then you're going to sit there and go, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to read this book. I want to see how the author did this, because it's all about that emotional payoff again. So not only do beats hit certain emotional payoffs, tropes do. Tropes absolutely do. And there's certain types of emotional payoffs that your readers already know about and they're expecting and they're looking forward to. And so it's important to include that within the framework of the book that you are working with. And again, you're going to get back to people saying, well, that's formulaic, that's a cliche. We see it all the time. Yes, we do, because that's what the romance readers love. They love it and they don't ever tire of it. You just got to find different ways to present it and make it your own. So again, I understand where folks are coming from when they say totally original idea, never been done before. I get that. But at the same time, if you want to sell a book, make sure you're writing something that people want to read. That's all, So what are your thoughts on tropes, Jana?
Yeah, I agree. So for a lot of people, they even put it in their subtitles, they're a thing. Subtitles and things like that. This is this kind of book, because that is what readers search for. They want to know that this is enemies to lovers, that this is friends to lovers, that this is a grumpy daddy. That's been one lately where they want the grumpy guy who's got the kids and he's all vulnerable and he just needs the right woman who's going to come in and fall in love with him and fall in love with his kids, and their world is going to be a much better place.
Right.
You say those and you can immediately start to envision it's this kind of story, but then what are you going to tie into that? And so I've seen people take the grumpy daddy and it's been paranormal. And so it's a bear shifter and he's got these cubs and the whole 9 yards and they actually shift. And here comes the human woman who is like, yes, I'm going to be the nanny too. Why are there bears? Why? And you can take that in a fun way.
Yeah.
But you see it there. You can see it in Billionaire. You can see it in the older romances, the guy who lost his wife and now he's old and he's grumpy and he's got grandkids and everything else, and it's bringing somebody into that. And people do love it. They identify these things and they say, I want to read all of the marriage of convenience ever, because that is the trope that really works for them. So it's fun to look at and go, how do I take the familiar but different? And I think I've talked about familiar but different on the podcast, but I'm going to talk about it again because I enjoy talking about it. This is what readers want. And this isn't just in romance. This is across the board. Readers always say that they really want something different and new and original, and they lie. Occasionally they do, but in general, there's reasons why we tend to gravitate towards certain genres as kind of being our genre, because it hits the emotional beats and the kinds of stories that we like. And that's why you have science fiction people and romance people and mystery people and horror people and all of that kind of thing. And while our good friend Dane can love horror and everything that goes into it, this will never, ever, ever be my thing. Because the tropes and the emotions that you feel reading a horror do nothing for me. I don't like to be afraid. I don't like to question those things. I have an overactive imagination and I start jumping at shadows. And that's bad because I have a very highly developed fight or flight reflex. And let's just say I'm not allowed to go to haunted houses anymore after I hit somebody.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. Back in the day, total side thing here. Back in the day, before they made it so that the actors were not allowed to approach you that close.
Right.
Yeah, they were allowed to, got startled, and turned around and popped somebody in the face.
Okay.
Because I have a very high fight or flight reflex, and the fight is higher than the flight in the most part. And then I felt bad because it was his fault, and yet don't do that because highly developed fight or flight reflex. So I don't like horror because I don't like feeling that way. But I like romance because I like what comes there. I like the action and the adventure of fantasy and science fiction and chasing new things and all that kind of stuff. So that's what tropes give us. And in romance, it's just as important because when people read romance, we've talked about they want those emotional beats. They want to feel falling in love for the first time all over again, because that's such a lovely emotion. And having it threatened and yet knowing in their heart of hearts that it's going to turn out okay. That's what they want, is they want that guaranteed that all of this bad stuff's going to happen, but in the end, we get it happy. And Virginie, I'm going to tattle on her, often says, you know, I hate that because it's not real life. But that's why so many people like it, is because in real life, we have no guarantees of these tropes working out. We have no guarantees of happily ever afters. In real life, if you put people that have as much agitation as some of these enemies to lovers stories do in the same room, someone's going to HR. You know, that bad things are going to happen. They are probably not going to fall in love and have it last forever. Real life doesn't work that way. But sometimes we really wish that it would. We want to see this amazing story. And so it's a fantasy. Romance is inherently a fantasy because it's the way things should be. It's romance the way that we hoped that it would happen. And that's why it isn't like real life, because real life is full of things happen. Yeah. But in romance, you can always be guaranteed that it's going to end up okay. And we like that feeling. So
why we call it fluffy escapism. And I think I've said this before. One of my good friends who writes Christmas romances, her catchphrase is cotton candy for the soul, because it's just cottony and fluffy and she's not really interested in solving controversial issues or discussing politics or any of those things. It's not about that. It's not too deep. It's just lovely and fluffy and fun, and her readers love that because that's how they escape the real world, and they get that emotional hit every single time. So it's what they love.
Yep. All right, so let's see, we've covered some of our beats. We've covered why it's not a bad thing to have the formula. So if somebody is looking to figure out what the formula is, besides just saying go forth and Google it, which Googling things is not a bad place to start anyway, are there other resources that we could point them at to say, here's some good things to go and read, to go and look up that might help you in figuring out what are these tropes and how would I apply it, tropes and beats and all that kind of thing, and how would I apply it to my writing? Any suggestions?
Yeah. So I always circle back to Gwen Hayes' Romancing the Beat. You can grab that book online on Amazon. It's wonderful. I mean, she really breaks down, I think it's about 20 romance beats, possibly more, but I'm pretty sure it's about 20. And she really goes into great detail about each beat within her book. And then I believe she offers a PDF version of that beat sheet. And you can see it towards the end of that book. At least in my version, you can. I don't know if she updated it or changed it, but it's just really nice as kind of a guide. If you don't want to hit every single one, like some folks can't work within the parameter of that many beats, you know, they can't plan it that heavily. There are also romance sheets that are, it's like the 7-point romance outline. So there are romance outlines that have less beats, but what you will find is that absolutely there is a meet cute. There's always an inciting incident. There are a few very similar plot points in the middle. And towards the end, you have the dark night where everything's bad, the grand gesture, and then the conclusion. So you will see very similar beats pop up that have to be in there no matter how much you've shortened that template. But those are really, really helpful. Another thing that I would suggest is Alex Newton and Klytics, because he does all of that market research for you, and he really narrows it down to what is expected within the romance reports. He will actually go into specific romance sub niches. I think he's done a report on billionaire romances, and I'm fairly certain he's done a report on sci-fi romance. He's done a report on
he just released Second Chance in January.
Yeah, so the
Second
second
chance
chance romance trope, he's there. I mean, it's getting to the point where some of these tropes have become their own categories almost, because there's so many books within specific that have specific tropes. And this is a smart man where he's gone in and said, well, let's just analyze these types of books that have these types of tropes, and see what the expectations are. What do the covers look like? What kind of things do you need to be hitting? And so that is one way that you can also take a look at how you would craft your own romance book, and specifically maybe what sub niche you want to jump into, and the things that ought to be included, or the things that are expected within that particular sub niche. So those are just a few things that you could take a look at. Jana, do you have any other resources online, any books that you can think of?
Oh, you stole my favorites.
Okay.
I would double down on Alex on the Klytics reports.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things, even if you don't want to buy a report, is sometimes I will just go to his shop. And so it's klytics.com/shop and see what he's made a report on, because he only makes a report on a sub niche if he's getting enough requests, and if when he goes in there, the data says that there's enough sales that it's worth authors going into it. So if you think, gosh, I want to write on, enter sub niche here, Louis L'Amour style romances, or Louis L'Amour style romances. No, Louis L'Amour is Western. Anyway, I want to do this kind of thing. And you go in there and you can't find a sub niche report, so it's just in his general romance report. The general romance report is very good, but it does give you kind of an idea that maybe this isn't as popular. And if you want to, so guys, we always talk to you about, business versus passion, and sometimes hopefully they're the same thing. Often they're the same thing. But when I'm looking through my list of ideas and going, what do I want to write next? What do I want to put out next? I do try to keep an eye out for what does the market want right now, or within the time frame that I think I can get the book out. Because some things that I'm fairly passionate about, the market is not passionate about it. So is it worth my time when I have so many ideas, and I have a lot, to go after that particular thing that isn't as heavy in the market versus something that I can see that the market wants? And this is called writing to market. We should probably do a whole podcast about it, but it sometimes gets a bum rap because people go, well, if you're just writing to market, you're just pandering to the masses. Oh, I kind of like pandering to the masses because the masses pay it so that I, can afford to do what I want to do. And especially if I have passionate ideas that do that, that's what you want. When you're writing to market well, is when you match your passion with what the market wants. And those are the first books you put out. And then if you have an idea that maybe the market doesn't really want, but you're still really revved up about, then go ahead and do that too. But often we hear people complain about how, well, I want to follow this very, very niche passion, but I also want to make $1 million. That's a hard one. It doesn't happen very often. Lightning strikes, but it doesn't happen very often. Usually we need to follow our passion that aligns with the market, or aligns at least fairly closely with the market, if we want to both follow that writing passion and make money at it. And you don't always have to make money. You can totally write a book just because, or because it's a hobby, or because you're writing it for someone you love. But just always consider that if you're looking at this as a career. And, you know, for Publishing by the Numbers, we do want to talk about career things. So we're going to talk about money, and we're going to talk about why we do these things. But that's important in romance. So looking for those things where, what is the business side of romance? That's also really, really important. It's important to know these things are hot and these things are not. And then also to know, even if the market is leaning in a certain direction, it might not work with your brand. So my brand is sweet. I'm not going to be writing dark mafia romances, which are generally expected to be a lot darker content than I want to get into, and a lot more sex than I want to get into. And that's not that they're bad, they're very popular, but it doesn't work with my brand. So there's a sideline on other things that kind of grew out of the Klytics reports, because those reports help us to know these are things that are working well, and then how can we align those with our passions. So, all right, CJ, my dear, it has come to one of our favorite times of the show. And the show, you notice the show goes a lot faster when there's only two of us. I am not sure if this is a good or a bad thing. Regardless, let's talk about our moments of absolute irrelevancy, even though I think I have already been irrelevant a couple of times. So what is your moment of irrelevancy?
So this morning I woke up, it was probably like 4 a.m. Because I had a fever, because I've been fighting a little cold here. And so I got up, I went into the kitchen because I wanted to get a glass of water and take some medicine. And I'm not really sure what happened. I think I was still really tired, but I ended up pouring a glass of milk, and I don't like milk. I'm not sure how I opened the fridge instead of using the sink and the and the water, the tap water. But I took my first gulp of milk and set it down and really woke up. And then I was like, what moron goes into the kitchen and opens the fridge to get water instead of, because I don't have a water jug in there. So that was fun. And then I spent the next 30 minutes trying to get the medicine to kick in and to work. And so I turned on the TV and I started watching unsolved murder mysteries at 4 a.m. by myself. And I think we've already talked about how I cannot be left alone with that type of, ambiance, the horror, the murder and everything. So by the time the medicine kicked in and I was feeling less in pain and not as feverish, I was freaked out. I couldn't even fall asleep after that because I was like, dang it. Why did I do that to myself at 4 a.m. when it's still dark outside and I can see through the windows, and anybody could be there to kill me at this point and nobody would know? And so, of course, my overactive imagination kicked in full gear, and I don't think I fell asleep till like 7. And at that point, you got to be up anyway. So, yeah, that's my irrelevant moment. I scared myself stupid. So, what about you, Jana?
I love it. Well, we've already talked about the irrelevancy of horror and punching people. It was more of just a smackety slap thing, but anyway, long and short of it. So the thing I am working on now is, okay, y'all, I am tired of winter. As far as I'm concerned, once Christmas is done, winter can be over, except for the fact that we need snow in the mountains in order to have good things happen in the summer. So my inner farmer accepts that winter has to last long enough to build up the snow, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm done with the cold. Things are no longer cheerful. It's all gray and that kind of thing. And winter should just be over. And so for me, this starts pushing my sense of I must start planting my garden because I'm a garden person. So I totally bought a huge stack of seeds, and I've been starting to sort out, okay, this can go out in March, and this can do this, and this can do the other thing. And I have a greenhouse that I'm going to build to go out on my porch, because we planted some herbs and put them in cute little pots and everything, and they just didn't do as well. And I think if I can build this little greenhouse out on the porch, then when the weather is crappy like this, we can put the herbs into the greenhouse, and we'll be able to have them all year long, which is awesome because I love cooking with fresh herbs. So this is me. I am already engaging with spring and summer. I am ready for it to be warm. I am ready to plant all of my plants. And I'm going to plant all of this, and then I'm going to get so tired that I only plant about half of them. But I have the seeds and I have a plan. We'll see how it goes.
I'm so impressed because generally when it comes to plants or growing anything, I just kill everything, even cacti. So,
oh dear.
So I'm so very impressed with your gardening abilities. Yay. Yay.
Yes, it's genetic. I blame my grandparents because they were farmers for many generations, and my grandmother could make anything bloom. I don't care what it is. You gave it to my grandmother and she could make it bloom. And she would have Christmas cactus flowers that they're only supposed to really bloom in December, and she can make them bloom almost year round. And I think it was just that there was some kind of I don't know, synergy between my grandmother and flowering things. And she grew hollyhocks and roses and Christmas cactus and orchids and giant, huge amaryllis and all these other things. And what little shred of that I got means that I can plant a pretty decent garden and put some squash in there and some tomatoes and some herbs, and away we go. But one day I want some of the things that she got to grow. But anyway, now we've really gone irrelevant. So we're going to move on. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. You can find the show and the show notes at www.elantumdigital.com and follow the podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast distributor. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see y'all later.
Bye, guys.